Good morning, welcome to the SYSDBA YouTube channel. My name is Kyle Haskins and I'm responsible for industry standard servers and enterprise here at SYSDBA. Today we're being joined by Mistry. He's the enterprise lead for Intel South Africa. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you, Kyle.
Avi, last time we ran into each other was at the pre-screening for How to Train Your Dragon 2, and I think the relationship between Intel, HP and DreamWorks has not only been a very fruitful relationship for both sides, but it's also saved many parents around the world a couple of hours of freedom, as their children watch these fantastic animations. Why don't you touch a little bit about the efficiencies and business relationship between Intel and DreamWorks?
Sure. So from a technology perspective, Kyle, what we're seeing with companies like DreamWorks is not just fantastic, groundbreaking movies, but we're seeing a huge transformation in business models. Whereas movies would have taken 9 to 12 months to produce, that activity is now happening in weeks. And whereas it would have potentially taken hundreds of millions of dollars, we're seeing a significant drop in cost. What this means is companies like DreamWorks SKG are using technology not just to be a part of the business or to service the business, but to actually be the business.
So through that partnership, DreamWorks has been able to innovate and to stay ahead of the game.
Quite right.
Could you give us a brief insight to what you see the biggest enterprise challenges being for the mid-market users? And when I say mid-market, I'm talking businesses between 1 and 500 users.
Sure. Kyle, the business market is under tremendous pressure in South Africa. We've seen macroeconomic factors with the rand having devalued, which means that imported products become really expensive. Labor costs and labor unrest hasn't been really easy on the economy. And this has an impact on technology spend. More importantly, it has an impact on service delivery. So what we're actually seeing as a trend is spend on technology to improve service delivery and to improve profitability.
How do those customers then drive that value back to the business when they're improving their efficiencies?
So Kyle, there's a number of factors. With technology constantly improving and becoming cheaper, we're seeing trends like risk migration that enable workloads that were reserved for proprietary systems like IBM or Oracle Spark now moving onto an x86 platform. The reason for this is purely economies of scale and application modernization. And what we mean by that is the agility at which you could add new features to old systems. Whereas on older proprietary systems, it would take a long time to integrate new features. With open x86 type of platforms like that run on Linux, it's far easier to integrate new features and functions.
So, touching on the risk then, SYSDBA, we've been deeply involved in data center consulting for a considerable amount of time. And we use technologies such as Server along with Intel to do these risk type migrations. Traditionally though, customers are very adverse to migrating from a risk platform to an x86 platform. Could you talk a little bit about those risks and how we mitigate them in that migration?
So if we look at the x86 market, it has skated around business critical workloads. And the reason for that was a perception of not being mission critical. That perception has now changed. Most core businesses in the US and Europe, top 10 banks worldwide, have moved workloads onto Linux-based platforms away from Unix-based platforms. And the reason for this is not just from an economic perspective. As I mentioned earlier, it's to allow for new features and functions to easily integrate onto workloads.
Virtualization as a technology has been very widely adopted across the market, and we've seen big adoption and usage of it within the South African market specifically. However, customers have always shied away from mission-critical type platforms. What are your thoughts on the risks and business value associated to consolidating mission-critical?
I think it's fantastic for businesses to consider virtualizing mission-critical workloads. The technology has proved its maturity. In many instances, companies have been running virtualized environments for 8 to 10, in some cases 12 years. And this has proved not just the savings, but also the reliability of infrastructure. Combined with the huge advancements in technology and the economies of scale from a price perspective, it now makes sense to move workloads that were once reserved for expensive proprietary systems onto x86 platforms. Remember, Kyle, this is then a stepping stone for the cloud type of environment, and I don't necessarily mean moving workloads out of a business into the public cloud. It could very well be on a private cloud or a hybrid cloud that could then burst into a public domain.
The South African market, we were used to having an electricity premium that was the lowest in the world, and we've now seen over time and with a lot of price hikes that we are actually stepping into a market where our electricity costs are becoming the highest in the world. How do you see customers bringing value back to the business through Intel technologies in order to mitigate the costs and hikes associated with the ever-increasing electricity premiums here in South Africa?
So Kyle, from a South African perspective, technology has always brought us massive savings. Electricity, as you quite rightly mentioned, has been really cheap, and it's often not been a factor that's been considered. The landscape's changing, however. We're seeing two things. We're seeing that electricity is rising rapidly in terms of costs, and in many cases, as we've seen this winter, it's becoming unavailable. When you consider that over the next 2 years, approximately 27,000 additional professional workers will move into the Sandton CBD, and the fact that the grid is not improving, it puts the whole question of power supply and energy far higher up in the thought process. So from an Intel perspective, apart from just realizing efficiencies in terms of having your database work quicker, having your total cost of ownership come down, we're significantly reducing power footprints so that the workloads that you have and the limited power that you have to run them go hand in hand.
Right, well, Avi, thanks very much for being with us today. We've really enjoyed having you here on our YouTube channel, and we hope to have you back soon. Thanks.
Thank you.